Hello viewers, welcome back to the channel. In this video, we'll continue our last discussion on Azure DevOps pipeline and we'll discuss the classical way to configure the CI/CD pipeline with Azure DevOps. For this, I'll move to the Azure DevOps project and we'll discuss the different configuration sections available with Azure pipeline. And this is our repository menu where we have our repository created, which we have configured in the last video. Now, next to that, we have a pipeline menu item. Under the pipelines, we have the pipeline, environments, release, library, task group, and deployment group. All of them are related to the pipeline or the deployment pipeline configuration. So if I go here, so this is the pipeline, the menu which is called pipeline, which is a bit of confusing, but this particular menu item is to define the pipeline for your application, whether you define it through the user interface, which is also called the classical pipeline configuration, or you can define the pipelines through the YAML as well. This particular area is dedicated for setting up the release pipeline or for setting up the continuous deployment. And here we configure the different environment configuration, which is basically to configure the approval gate or the approval based deployment, where we set up the Azure DevOps users or the Active Directory user or user groups, which can be used as an approver for your pipeline. Then you can also use this library menu item where you can store the variable groups, secure file, and other configuration which can be used across your pipelines. Apart from this, you have the task group. So if you would like to combine certain number of tasks and create a group of those tasks so that you can reuse those tasks if required, then those tasks can be configured as a task group and it can be found and managed here with this particular menu item. And the last, you have the deployment groups, which can be used to deploy to the various environment. Let's say if you have a requirement of deploying the same application to the various platform, various environment together, then you can use the deployment group for that purpose. We'll go into the details of each of these items. Let's first of all try and understand the different options available with the classical pipeline. So I'll click here on this pipeline menu item. That will take you to the pipelines which you might have already configured for your application or for your project, whether it is configured through the UI or through the YAML. It will display it here. Now, if you would like to create a new pipeline, you can click here on this button at the right side, new pipeline. Here on this page, pipeline configuration is asking where is your source code. Do we have a source code into the Git repository, Bitbucket, GitHub, or any other source control repository? So that's what we can configure. And remember, this particular tag YAML, it means that if you choose either of these options, that will basically, that by choosing this option, you are willing to configure your pipeline with YAML. But if, as I said, we are going to discuss the classical editor, so it means that we can use this last option, which is the use classical editor to create the pipeline without YAML. So that's the option we are going to choose for this particular discussion. I'll click here. And that will navigate to a next section of creating the pipeline. In this section, as you can see, it says that you have to first of all select the repository. So again, we have the same option. Where is your repository? Is it in Azure Git, which is a default selected option? Azure is considering that you have the default, your repository by default here in this particular, here in the Git. And then if it is in Git, where is your team project location? it's in the Azure DevOps. If you have multiple projects, make sure you select the appropriate project within the Azure DevOps. Next, the repository. So within the project, if you have multiple repositories, then make sure you select the appropriate repository. For example, I do have these many repositories, so I would like to select this one. And within the repository, which branch we would like to target this pipeline to set up. So make sure that you select all these configuration correctly. Now, if you remember from our previous discussion, we might be setting here a continuous integration. It means that we would like to make sure that we are able to set up a continuous integration which will enable the continuously build your source code, run the test cases, or any other objective which you want to configure, which you want to achieve with this CI build. After the right selection, let's click here on the continue. Next, we have the choose template option. So it means that you can choose a template that can build the kind of application source code which you have. So for example, if I have a .NET application, then I do have certain template available built in for my .NET application, which I can use to build the .NET application as is. For example, if I use this, so that will have the certain number of templates available. This has a built-in template available for me, which I can use to deploy. Okay. If you look at the template, it has different stages. So from this definition itself, you can see that this particular template has stage to build and test the ASP.NET application, whereas this particular template has build, package, test, and deploy the ASP.NET application into the Azure DevOps, into Azure Web App. So it has the additional stage called the deploy to Azure DevOps, whereas this just compiles the application, doesn't deploy the application. And then you have certain other different templates available which you may be interested on. Let's say if you do not want to continue with this classical editor, you can anytime go ahead and select this particular YAML. So for example, you do have existing YAML pipeline already configured, then you can select this option and you can continue using the YAML build instead of UI. And now you also you do have the option as an empty job to start from the scratch to build your pipeline. So in this case, we are going to take a look at both the option. Let's say in this case, let's first of all select this ASP.NET application, as we have the ASP.NET application source code in our repository. Now we are into the configuration board of our pipeline, which looks something like this, regardless of any template which you might use. So if I start from the top, here at the top, you have the name of your pipeline, which you can change anytime. Let's say project 01 and CI. That's the build name I might want to give. Next, you have the different tabs. So you have the tabs, which shows the different number of task configuration for your pipeline. Then you have the variable section or the variable tab, where you can define your variables which you may want to use with your pipeline. Then you have the triggers, options, and history. We'll go into the details of these sections. So now let's first of all discuss the very first tab, which is a task tab. There are different sections to the task tab. So very first section is the Azure build pipeline. As you can see that the section called the build pipeline, it means that we here with the pipeline menu item, with the classical editor pipeline menu item, we are trying to build the application, we are trying to compile the application, and that's why it is called the build pipeline. Again, we have the same configuration. You can change the pipeline name right from here or from here. And then you have the option to specify the agent pool. So what is agent pool? So agent pool is a machine on which your application source code will be downloaded from the repository and it will be used for the compilation. So that's the hardware or the machine configuration. That's what you can configure here. So with the agent pool, with the Azure DevOps agent pool, there are different number of options available. So there are two type of agents which you have. One is the Microsoft hosted agent, which we are calling it as a Azure pipeline agents. So these are the machine given by the Microsoft Azure. These machine can be used to compile your source code or to deploy your source code. These machine will have all the software necessary to deploy the application, whether it is a Java based application, Terraform, Azure DevOps, Python, or any platform or any language software will be available onto those machines. And then you have the self-hosted agent. It means that you have the options to create your own machine into your Azure environment or on-premise environment, and you can configure those machines as your agent to compile and deploy your source code. So that is called the self-hosted agent. We'll go into the details later on when we discuss the self-hosted agent in some future videos. When you specify the agent type or the from the agent pool, so pools means that the word pool means that you can have collection of these agents. So you can have collection of Microsoft agents, or you could have the collection of self-hosted agents. So from that collection pool, here you need to specify which particular agent pool item you would like to use as part of this particular build. Next, within that agent pool, what is the agent specification, which is the type of operating system which you might want to use to build your application. So with Azure DevOps agent pool specification, there are three different type of agent specification or three different type of operating system which you can use: Windows, Linux, and macOS. So either of these type you can use. So if I scroll it down here, you can find macOS, Linux, which is Ubuntu, which is Linux, and then you have certain version of Windows Server or the Windows Server operating system available. So you can change those agents here on the pipeline configuration. Next, you need to specify what is the path of your application. Where is your application solution file or the file which you would like to build? So if you have a Java application, then you might want to specify your pom.xml file or the file which will start or initiate your compilation process. And at the last, you have the artifact name. So as we have discussed that this part of the compilation process, your compilation output will be used as an artifact, and the artifact name is something which is what we can specify here in this particular configuration. So by default, the name is given as a drop, but you can change that particular name. Take a moment and discuss about this artifact. So whenever application is going to be compiled successfully, it will generate an outcome which is going to be, let's say, combination of certain DLLs, exe, for example, and that artifact is going to be published onto machines. So Microsoft has certain number of workspace or the machines are available to you where it stores all your artifact for a specific duration, and then that artifact will get an artifact ID which you can use to download the artifact anytime and use that particular artifact to deploy the application. So this is the name of the artifact, and obviously, as I said, you'll get an ID of the artifact as well. Next section we have here is with the pipeline. We have the get source, which we have already configured at the beginning of configuring our pipelines. Again, if you would like to change that configuration later, then you can change it right from here. What is your project name, repository name, branch name? Do you need a clean deployment every time, and some other configuration? Okay, so by default, when we have configured this pipeline, it contains a single stage. Okay, this pipeline is whole runs in a particular single stage, and in that stage you could have multiple jobs, and those jobs are going to be run inside the agents. So the agent which we have chosen right here from this particular section, or you can override those agents right here from this particular section. So the third section, we have the agent job. So for example, the agent which we have selected, let's say Windows agent, and within the Windows agent, we can run the number of jobs. So this is the job one. By default, we can change the name of the job. Let's say I'll say build job, for example. Okay, I could have a job called build job, and that job is obviously running on the same agent. But if you would like to override the job to run on a different agent, for example, if I could have two jobs, one job is build and other one is deploy, for example, or one job is built on the Mac OS, another job is built on the Windows OS, for example. If that's a requirement, then I could set up the two jobs and I can override the agent right here from this particular section. So the default job will take the agent configuration from the pipeline, as you can see, inherited from the pipeline. So it will take the configuration from the pipeline. But if I would like to use a different agent pool, then I can set that particular agent right from that particular section. Apart from this, it has certain other properties available. For example, how is your execution plan? Do we want to run the number of parallel jobs together? Do we want to run the job onto multiple configuration? For example, do I want to run or compile our application in x32 and x64 platform both together? If that's the case, then I can use this configuration and I can specify that I would like to run this job two times, one with the x32 and other one is x64. So that is what I can define here. Again, if you would like to define the multi-agent job, let's say this job should run or compile the application on Mac OS, Linux and Windows all together, I can specify the multi-agent configuration as well. By default, it is not selected, but if you have a requirement, then you can set up that as well. Job cancellation and timeout is something really important. If you have a long running job, for example, if you have a job to configure some infrastructure which takes more than an hour, for example, then you can set the cancellation time, because by default your pipeline has the cancellation time of 1 hour or 59 minutes. If it exceeds more than that, then by default your pipeline gets cancelled. But if you have certain requirement wherein you know that your jobs are going to run beyond 1 hour, then you can set the cancellation time right here at this particular section. Here you have the dependency. So you can set up a dependency of the jobs between each other. So like I said, if I have one more agent, let's create an agent, for example, right from here. I'll call it as, let's say, job name deploy, for example. Then I can set the dependency of this deploy onto the build job, which is this particular job. So this will only run if my build job is going to be completed. So I'm setting up a sequential dependency. If I do not set up a sequential dependency, by default, as the nature of these job will run on parallel. So execution of these job will run on parallel. Okay, then you have the certain conditions by default that run when all the previous job have succeeded. But if that's the default setting, but if you would have some other settings option, there are some other options are also available. For example, you always wanted to run this particular job even though if a previous job is failed. If that's a requirement, then you can basically set these option or choose this option if you want. So that's about the build job from the classical configuration. And no matter it is classical or YAML based pipeline, this entire concept is going to remain same. It just here you have the user interface to visualize and understand the different configuration option, whereas in the YAML you need to have the idea where you can configure and what are those configuration properties available in form of YAML which you may want to set up. So that's the only difference. But from the configuration point of view, the nature of both the pipeline remains same. Okay, now coming back to the inside story of the job. So each job, so like we can see that here in the pipeline we could have, pipeline is called stage. Each stage could have multiple agents or the multiple jobs. Agent is also called job. And then within the job you could have multiple steps. Each step is called the task, or the each step is called the task which you may want to run onto the particular job. So for example, within the .NET template which we have chosen here, we do have the very first task which we have used to, let's say, use to install the NuGet onto the target machine, and the next command we would like to run, let's say, restore the NuGet. So it will download the NuGet which has been used within my application, and then subsequently it will build, test, and then generate the or publish the artifact onto the Microsoft server or the DevOps server. Now these are the steps. Different steps comes by default when I choose the template. But what if I do not choose any template? For example, if I go here on the pipeline, create new pipeline, and with the classic editor, let's say if I choose an empty job right now without having any selection. So with the empty job, I get the build section as is, get source as is, agent job as is. But with the agent job, as you can see here, we do not have any jobs which has any task. Okay, so here you can see we have .NET application template which we have chosen, where it's here we do not have any. So let's say in the case wherein we do not have any job, any steps with our jobs available, you can click here on this particular job, agent job plus icon, and that way you would have the access to all the tasks available with Microsoft Azure DevOps. So Azure DevOps has the collection of different tasks or steps available which you can use in your application, in your pipeline, to achieve your goal. For example, here do have the option for NuGet, which is already available. So I can use the NuGet installer tool, and then I can use the NuGet restore. This task will restore package and publish. So you do have all these capabilities available. Then I could have the .NET application task which I can use it. For example, this is the one, or build, sorry, I could have the build task. So this is just to give you an idea that these are the different tasks. And now if I go to individual tasks, each and individual task would have their own set of properties, configuration which you may want to configure. For example, this NuGet task has a property of, let's say, what is the version of exe which you would like to install, which is the command you may want to run with this NuGet restore. Do you want to run the restore command, publish, package, or any other custom command which you want to run? Similarly, with the build task, you may want where is your source code location, what is the Visual Studio version you want to use for building your source code, any other other arguments which you may want to use with the ms build, because this build command will use the ms build as a command line tool. So do you want to pass the extra argument to that ms build command? So things like that. Basically, you have certain number of options available depending upon the task you choose. For example, a very simplistic task which you might use the copy task, which might help you to copy the task from the source location to destination location. So obviously you need to specify what is your source location, what is your target location, and what is the type of content which you may want to copy from source to destination. So you can simply pass the star.txt type or jar file or any other type of file which you may want to copy from one location to other location. Okay, once you have all this set up, you can simply save this. You can simply save it. Let's say we have set up this. Once you save for the very first time, you can override the location. So by default, this is your project, and these are the kind of folder you can build. So I could have a, let's say, folder called pipelines, where I may want to store all my pipelines. I can put a comment here what I have done with this change. Next is the variable section, so where we have the different variables where we can configure all the different variables. So with Azure DevOps pipelines, you do have certain number of system variables available, which is called the predefined variables. So some of the predefined variables are already being used here in your pipeline. For example, build configuration is build type or release type, build platform is any CPU, and then system.debug. So we want to, if you want to debug, generate the debug output, then you can set this variable to true. There are so many variables available which you may want to use it in your pipeline, and all those variable help you can find here with this particular link. You can click here on this link and you'll find the detail of all those different variables which are available. And for example, this is agent build directory, where exactly on which location inside the agent your source code is compiling. For example, this is one of the example output of this build directory variable type, so which in some cases you might want to use it. Next, you have the variable group. So you could use the variable group with your application. So if let's say you have commonly used group of variables which you have defined for your pipeline to be used, then you can use or link those variable group here in this here into the pipeline from this particular option. If I click here on the variable link variable group, that will basically give me the list of variable groups which are available, which I might want to link. For example, this is one of the variable group which I can link it here, and then if I expand, these are the variables now available which I can basically use it here on my pipeline. So I can simply use this variable in my pipeline for some purpose, and all those variable groups you will find it here on the library section. So if I go to the library section now, under my DevOps project, these are the different variable groups which were available for me to select. Again, I can go, these are the different options which are available. You can anytime add or edit to the variables. This is the name of the group, this is the different variable values. If anytime you would like to make your variable value to secure, you can change this value as a secure, and that will become secure. No one would be able to know what is the value of that particular variable. Okay, that's about the variable group. Next tab we have is the triggers tab. So with the triggers tab, basically you might want to set up the event on which this pipeline is supposed to execute. For example, if you do we want to run the or enable the continuous integration. So like I said, we would like to make sure that whenever somebody runs the PR, then we would like to enable the continuous integration, and we want to run the pipeline just to compile the source code. If it is the purpose, set up a continuous integration, click here on this particular branch, this particular checkbox, and that will set up the continuous integration. It has the options like include type and then branch, on which branch you would like to set up a continuous integration. So for example, if I'm merging the source code from any future branch to main branch, then this continuous integration pipeline will automatically be executed. Now let's say if we have this pipeline running the unit test cases, and we would like to make sure that all the unit test cases runs at least once a day every night when the when our development team finishes their development. So if that's a requirement or kind of a requirement we have, we can schedule a build with this schedule option. And with that schedule option, let's say if I set to run every 1 o'clock in the morning or in the night, then every day on the week it will basically run this pipeline. It will run all my test cases or compile my source code. That is what I can do here with the schedule option. Again, just to mention here, all these options are available with YAML based pipeline as well, but here with the UI you are getting more of configuration and user interface which is easy to understand what all configuration which we can perform here with this Azure DevOps pipeline. Then you have the build completion section. So build when another build completes. So basically again setting up the dependency. So let's say if you have a build, if you would like to trigger this build when a previous build or any other build pipeline gets completed, that is what you can configure here with this particular option. So for example, I can set up DevOps CI. So whenever DevOps CI is going to be completed on the master branch, if the DevOps CI is completed from the master branch, then this is going to run it. Okay. Next you have the options block. Options are, this is more of your build configuration properties. For example, properties of the build number whenever a build is going to run. Let's say for example how your build number format should be. For example, this is one of the build which has been run. So if you look at the build property, build number, which is, or the number of build which has been run, is running with the year, month and the date of, and then the number or subsequent number. So that is something which you can configure as in build format. Anytime if you would like to get the configuration option or the different way to configure your build format, you can go to this particular link which is given here on this Microsoft documentation, and you can refer or use the system variable to configure your build number. This is the stage or the current status of the build. So anytime if you would like to pause or disable the pipeline due to some reason, if you, or temporary, if you would like to disable the pipeline, you can do it right here from this particular option under the options section. So this is about automatically link the build work item. So as we know that with Azure DevOps, we can create the Azure DevOps work item board, and task in that board, we can create a task. So if your developers are working on some application source code which to accomplish certain task, and after completing their source code, you may want to enforce the developer to link that task, so that the task which they have been assigned and the work which they have completed on this source code repository, both of them are relatively linked with each other, so that if I open the task, I can find the source code changes, because the source code change or the change set will be linked to my task. So that is what this option is saying. Or similarly, if I go here, I can see that this particular change set is been attached to this particular task. So vice versa, the reference can be linked with the pipeline right from this particular option. Next, you have the pipeline as the work item. So as a work item on a failure. So for example, if your pipeline is failing to compile or to run successfully, in that case, you may want to create a bug or a work item and assign to a team of developers who may want to address the compilation failure or the pipeline failure issues. So that is what you can enable it right from this particular section. Let's say as soon as I enable it, what type of work item type I would like to create. Is it a bug? It's a feature, task, issue, user story, and then assign to a requester, and then I can add those fields, for example, whom do I want to assign and things like that basically. Next we have the status badge. So basically status badge will help you to show the current live status for your pipeline. So that status generates from this markdown link which you can use and refer it anywhere in your wiki document. So that shows that what is your current configuration or the pipeline status looks like. Okay, here is the history of the changes which you can see. That's about the pipelines, or the pipelines which you can configure with the classical approach. I can simply save it here again for the whatever changes I have made. You have the option called save and queue, save and just queue. So I would like to queue it, then I can queue it from this option. So if I open this again, I can queue this, and again you do have the option to change the certain parameters. For example, the parameters of the pipeline section which we have seen. Do we want to change the agent pool? or the agent specification or the branches or even some of the variables. What if I want to add some additional variables to this option so that I should be able to change it? So to do that, you can simply go to the variables and check at the queue time. So once I set this, I should be able to setable at the queue times. Okay, so that's the pipeline. Now if I run it, and when I run, I do have the jobs. As you can see, within the single pipeline stages, we did configure the jobs, two jobs. One is the build and the deploy, and we have also set the dependency of the build and deploy. So once the build is going to be completed, only the deploy will trigger. That's the two jobs within the one stage. I can go to the job and you can see the history of the job. As you can see, it has started the job onto this agent pool with this image which we have used, and then at the moment the status is it's initializing the job. So what it's doing right now is trying to download the source code into the machine, so Microsoft hosted machine. So this is the machine name if you look at, and inside this machine the machine is running as the VSS administrator, which is Visual Studio administrator. That's the current version of, or the name of version of the image for that particular virtual machine. And then later on, basically it's downloading the source code repository. It's basically performing a git clone operation. As you can see, it has run the git config command and then git clone command with this option basically. Next, it's trying to download the run the set up the NuGet package, use the NuGet restore, and it's trying to compile the source code, and it has failed to compile the source code because it has not found any solution.start or solution file in that. Okay, so this was about the demonstration of how do you configure the pipeline, how do you set up the pipeline. In the next demo, we'll try and understand about the YAML based configuration. We'll learn how do you use the YAML based task or the pipeline to configure your pipeline from the YAML. I hope you have found this useful. If it is, give it a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Thanks for watching it. See you in the next video. Bye for now.